Welcome to the deep dive.
Mhm.
Today we're taking a deep plunge into a really, well, a challenging and powerful source. Excerpts from Thomas Carlyle's 19th century work, past and present.
Mhm.
Now, this isn't just history, it's Carlyle. Writing in the 1840s, grappling with the state of England, and holding it up against a detailed picture of a medieval world.
Yeah, drawn from a 12th century monastery chronicle.
That's right. He uses Jocelin of Brecklande's chronicle of St. Edmundsbury Monastery as his main lens into the past.
It's quite a bold move, isn't it? Using a medieval monk's record to critique the industrial age.
Definitely.
So our mission today, really, pulling from these sources you shared, is to navigate Carlyle's, well, sometimes dense prose, let's be honest, extract the most important ideas, and try to figure out what insights he offers about, society, work, leadership, truth itself.
What was he seeing then, and what might that tell us today? That's the core of it.
Exactly. So get ready to dig into his sharp critique and those surprisingly vivid comparisons. We're going straight to the heart of the material you provided.
Okay, let's start where Carlyle begins then.
Yeah.
Describing the condition of England in the 1840s. The sources, they paint a picture of serious commercial stagnation, suffering.
Yeah, a tough time. He sees life itself as this profound, almost dangerous Sphinx riddle.
Right, and that description of the Sphinx.
Yeah.
It's quite something.
It really is, that contrast. The womanly celestial loveliness on top, representing potential order, wisdom, but then ending in the claws and body of a lioness.
That dark, destructive fatality.
Exactly. And England, he argues, is facing this fundamental life or death question it must answer, or perish.
And what's so striking is he says, despite all the apparent activity, true justice seems, well, absent, elusive, hard to grasp.
He uses that famous image, doesn't he? Jesting Pilate asking, what is truth?
Right. The source suggests Pilate couldn't see truth even if it was right there. His inner vision was just gone, paralyzed.
And he connects this abstract sense of things being fundamentally wrong to very real events. The Manchester insurrection, for instance, is highlighted in the sources.
Ah, yes, the protest by a million hungry operative men.
But he sees it as just, brute thunder, that's his word, lacking any real light or guidance from above.
Just a symptom, then. A raw cry of pain. Proof that England is failing that Sphinx riddle.
That's how he frames it. And he really dissects the language of his time, too. Like the phrase fair day's wages for fair day's work. He calls it utterly sarcastic in the sources.
Sarcastic. Why?
Well, because he gives these extreme historical examples to show how little true worth is rewarded sometimes.
It's like John Milton getting only £10 for Paradise Lost. It seems unbelievable.
It does. Or Cromwell's head ending up on Westminster Hall's gable after his death. The ultimate lack of earthly reward for immense effort and impact.
So his point is, the truly godlike, the really valuable stuff, you just can't pay for it with money.
Exactly. And he drives this home by comparing human workers to animals. Girth, the swineherd in Ivanhoe, remember him? He at least got the parings of the pork.
Okay.
Horses get their food and shelter. But the manual worker, the source says, cries in vain for basic food and warmth.
Wow. So society isn't even providing the basic necessities that animals receive. That's a powerful indictment.
It really is.
And this initial scene he paints, the suffering, the injustice, the struggle to see truth, doesn't that feel, I don't know, familiar? Like trying to make sense of today's world with all the information overload, trying to figure out what's real, what's fair.
Absolutely. That difficulty distinguishing between the eternal inner facts and the transient outer appearances, as he calls them, that's completely central to his argument.
Okay, so if that's the symptom, what's Carlyle's diagnosis? What's the core disease afflicting England, according to him? He points right at Mammonism.
Yes, the worship of Mammon, the god of wealth. The source calls cash payment the shabbiest gospel of the age. It's all driven by supply and demand, competition, laissez-faire.
Basically a system where the only real law is making money.
Pretty much. And the source doesn't pull any punches about where that leads. Ruin, famine, madness. This brute god Mammon, he says, it must be dethroned.
But the blame isn't just on the industrialists, is it? He contrasts Mammonism with the idle dilettantism of the aristocracy.
Right, they go gracefully idle in Mayfair, living lavishly but producing nothing of real value, just consuming.
Ah, and that comparison the source makes to the French do-nothing aristocracy. That's pretty chilling.
It is. They were on a sliding scale to ruin, he says. A not-so-subtle warning for England's own aristocracy. Find a real purpose or face the consequences.
And this leads to, what, a pervasive atmosphere of quackery, puffery, unfaithfulness?
Yes, exactly. It's all about pretending, appearing to be something you're not. The source gives that example of the hat manufacturer.
Right, focused on selling a shoddy hat with clever marketing instead of just making a good hat.
Or the image of the Pope with his woolen ironback, just putting on a performance without real substance behind it. Carlyle sees the whole nation heading for disaster, worshipping stuffed clothes suits.
Appearances without reality.
And for Carlyle, this isn't just superficial. This widespread insincerity points to something much deeper. A loss of soul, or what he bluntly calls no religion.
He doesn't necessarily mean losing faith in a specific church, though.
Not entirely. It's more about forgetting the eternal substance of things, the underlying reality, seeing the universe as just, an unintelligible, perhaps like a broken clock just ticking away meaninglessly.
And he's clear this isn't something you can fix with just political upheaval, right? French revolutions, Manchester insurrections. They're symptoms, not the cure for this spiritual emptiness.
Exactly. Another symptom he points to is insincere speech, or cant. Yeah, where the tongue, which he thinks should be an incarnate word embodying truth, is instead used for empty formulas, jargon, absurdities. It makes it hard to even identify the knaves and dastards, as he puts it, when everyone's language is kind of debased.
And this critique reaches right up to Parliament and the government itself.
Oh, yes. The source sees them focused on narrow, earthly things like the 4 pleas of the crown, basically historical legal technicalities about the king's rights, not some higher purpose or vision.
Just managing affairs, not leading towards anything greater.
And built on a liar's rock substratum, he says, even struggling with blatant bribery. He uses that character, Pandarus Dogdraft, as an example of how influence and money lead people to respect the utterly unworthy.
Okay, so that's a pretty bleak diagnosis. Where does Carlyle see any hope? Any potential remedies or a path forward?
Well, he calls for wisdom and an aristocracy of talent, the idea that society should be led by the genuinely wisest individuals.
That sounds straightforward enough, doesn't it? Governed by the best and brightest.
It does, but the source immediately throws cold water on how easy that is. There's that quote from the Houndsditch Indicator.
Right, suggesting that even with incorruptible voters, you might just elect a babissimus.
Exactly. Not the truly wisest or most capable, but maybe just the one who's best at getting appointed or elected through the existing systems.
Or perhaps, the source speculates, maybe the nation just doesn't have enough collective wisdom to find the right leaders that way.
Which leads him to what he presents as the one healing remedy, hero worship.
Now that sounds potentially problematic today.
Well, he doesn't mean blindly following charismatic fakes. For Carlyle, it means learning to recognize and follow true heroes, individuals who are aligned with eternal laws, with truth.
Okay.
And crucially, it also means striving to become more heroic ourselves, more aligned with truth and duty.
And this includes what he calls the arrestment of the knaves and dastards.
Yes. Identifying the insincere, the unworthy, and basically ceasing to give them power or respect. Stop worshipping the stuffed clothes suits. He even suggests editors should see this as part of their mission.
Right, to guide people towards recognizing real worth.
And this is precisely where he turns to history. He brings in Jocelin's chronicle of the 12th century St. Edmundsbury monastery, not just as a contrast, but as a way to understand the present and maybe the future.
How so?
He sees the past and future not as totally separate, but as the same fact in new dress. Like that image of the life tree Yggdrasil, rooted deep in history, but constantly growing into the present and future.
So the fundamental human struggles, the potential for good leadership or bad, they're constant, just played out differently.
That's the idea. He could contrast the, functioning though flawed monastery with the problems of his own time, while acknowledging it's hard to bridge that chasm of 7 centuries.
And Jocelin, the chronicler himself, becomes this key witness.
Yeah, a kind of Boswell, as Carlyle calls him, capturing these small, telling details that bring that world to life. Even if Jocelin is frustratingly silent on things we might find interesting, like, what King John wore.
Huh. Right. Like John Lackland only leaving 13 pence for his board, the source values that strange, real detail more than some grand fiction.
Exactly. And the monastery itself, growing from reverence for St. Edmund's body, attracting gifts, it represents a different kind of social glue than Carlyle saw in the 1840s.
But things weren't perfect back then either, were they? The sources give us Abbot Hugo as an example of failed leadership.
It's definitely not perfect. Hugo was clearly ineffective, burdened by horse leeches, crippling debt, basically.
Couldn't manage the finances at all. The source notes he had not found 1 penny to distribute to the poor when he died.
And the monk's main duty was just obedience. His leadership was so lacking, the source actually calls his death providential, a necessary removal.
Which then paves the way for the central figure from the chronicle, Abbot Samson. Carlyle holds him up as a model, right?
Very much so. A model of leadership rooted in actual worth and capability, not just position.
The description of his election process is fascinating.
Isn't it? That committee of 6, chosen by 13, swearing on the Gospels to pick 3 names for the king. The source presents it as showing true reverence for worth, not just counting votes in a ballot box.
And the king's approval, Deus est cum eis, God is with them, signifies something deeper than just political rubber stamping.
Right. And Samson's character portrait in the source is so vivid, mild-faced, but capable of a terrible flash of anger that he kept under control, thoughtful sternness, but also sorrowful pity.
And indifferent to personal luxury. That detail about his food.
Yeah, preferring simple food, and Jocelin testing him as a novice by seeing if he'd changed the dish set before him. He never did.
So clearly a leader of action. Energetic, undertaking a radical reform of his economics, declaring war with disorder in the monastery.
The source calls him a just clear-hearted man with the invaluable talent of silence, knowing when not to speak.
Didn't tolerate laziness in the monks.
No, disliked lazy monks, but balanced that firmness with hospitality, and the practical examples are great.
Building useful things, a hospital, schools, tiling roofs because the ruin was an eyesore. Tackling specific problems like collecting reaping silver, or those eel payments.
Yeah, agreeing to take a fixed sum for the eels rather than dealing with catching them. Very practical.
And handling difficult monks effectively, whether they were caroling, howling, or breaking gates, even outmaneuvering the Bishop of Ely over timber rights.
And daring to stand up to King Richard himself when he believed justice was on his side. That took courage.
And Carlyle stresses that Samson's actions were rooted in truly religion, not just going through the motions, but a deep sense of duty, connecting practical deeds to a higher purpose, like his interest in the Crusades, his reliance on St. Edmund's shrine.
Right, and this kind of hero worship, recognizing and submitting to genuine capability and worth, is contrasted sharply in the source with what Carlyle saw as hollow modern attempts, like examining Hampden's coffin with penknives.
A sort of disconnected superficial curiosity rather than real reverence.
Exactly. And Samson's life is described as one of labor and a journey. It reinforces the idea that true leadership, true worth, isn't about ease or comfort. It's about toil, effort, struggle.
Which brings us neatly to perhaps the strongest theme running through these sources.
Yeah.
The absolute dignity and necessity of work.
Yes, Carlyle states it plainly. There is perennial nobleness and even sacredness in work.
Work is alone noble. But he's not romanticizing it, is he? He acknowledges it's hard.
Not at all. He calls it a sublime sadness, an infinite battle against infinite labor. Yet he argues the greatest unhappiness is being unable to work, remembering that phrase, the night cometh wherein no man can work.
And he finds something deeply admirable in that medieval monastic saying, laborare est orar. Work is worship.
He calls it an unpreached, inarticulate gospel. Something fundamentally true, even if not formally preached.
The source suggests that actually applying yourself to a task, bending yourself to work, it quiets the hell dogs of doubt, desire, despair.
Yes, it acts as a purifying fire. It demands method, force, perseverance. It focuses the mind.
And it's a tool for positive change. Work is how you fight back against. What did he say?
How you actively smite ignorance, stupidity, and brute-mindedness in the world through constructive action.
Okay, now let's revisit that fair day's wages idea again. He calls the demand for fair pay most unrefusable, right?
Yeah.
Essential for survival.
Yes, absolutely essential. But then he introduces that paradox. The true wages of noble work, the highest kind of work, aren't earthly. They are in heaven or else nowhere.
So the heroic person doesn't just sell their labor for cash. They give their life, their effort to the task.
That's the challenging idea. The highest motivation comes from duty, from the inherent value of the work itself, not just the paycheck. He adds that all work, really, in its own way, is a making of madness same.
And the real unredeemed ugliness isn't poverty itself, but a slothful, idle people.
Exactly. He extends this potential nobility even to the industrial class, the working aristocracy, or captains of industry, like his fictional Plugson of Plugson.
He sees their potential role as leading a vital war on a very genuine enemy, bareness of back, producing necessary things for society.
Yes, a potentially noble calling. But he critiques their current state, acting like buccaneers, just focused on grabbing money, missing that higher purpose.
And the source makes that remarkable claim that England's only truly significant achievement in recent centuries has actually been its practical material work.
Yeah, turning cotton into shirts, building railways. He sees this practical effort as the one God's voice, still heard in what he saw as an atheistic age, even if people misinterpreted it as just being about profit and loss.
So even within that flawed Mammonist system, the actual work being done had a kind of fundamental reality that the idleness and the quackery lacked.
That seems to be his point. It was real, tangible creation.
So looking ahead then, how does Carlyle suggest building a better future? What principles does he think are needed for, well, healthier organization?
Permanence is a huge one for him, contrasted sharply with temporary contract or, month-long hiring.
He uses that strong analogy of hiring a soldier, doesn't he?
Yes. You hire a soldier for years, for life if needed, not just for a month or a single battle. Stability is crucial for real commitment, for fruitful work.
And that anecdote about friend Prudence, the Quaker manufacturer, that really illustrates it.
It does. His workers, having permanence, were more invested, more reliable, worth £7,000 to boot, Carlyle says, compared to the mutinying temporary workers of someone like Blank.
So this principle extends to the idea that a worker ideally should have an interest in the enterprise, feel connected, invested for the long haul.
Yes, some kind of stake beyond just the daily wage.
And looking even further ahead, the source makes a bold claim. The organization of labor is the problem of the whole future.
It's a huge statement. He suggests that just as men are regimented, organized for fighting as soldiers, they can, and maybe should, be organized for beneficial ends.
Like what?
Things like sanitary reform, creating people's parks, education, organizing human effort for the common good.
Another major problem the source identifies is isolation.
He calls it the sum total of wretchedness. That feeling of being cut off, alone, like you're in a hostile camp, lacking real community.
And he contrasts this with past times where he feels sisterhood, brotherhood was less explicitly denied.
Yeah, using examples like the loaf-giverous lady or Mungo Park finding help from a black benefactress in Africa, these moments of fundamental human connection and mutual aid that he feels are being lost.
And then there's perhaps the most difficult idea, reconciling despotism with freedom. How on earth does he propose that?
Well, he suggests making despotism just,
Right.
meaning obedience not to arbitrary power, but to the laws of God, or what he calls nature's aristocracies, recognizing and submitting to real superiors, those whom God or nature has actually made superior through wisdom, capability, justice.
Not the mock superiors who just have power through wealth or inherited titles.
Exactly. He even frames William the Conqueror, controversially, as a kind of resident house surgeon provided by nature, a harsh force maybe, but one needed to impose order based on a deeper reality, a deeper justice.
So it's about recognizing and following legitimate authority, authority based on wisdom and justice, even if it's strong, rather than arbitrary power or fake authority.
Yeah, it seems to be the core of it. It's challenging stuff. And the source ends this section on a note of hope, actually, that light is coming into the world.
Okay.
And where truth and mercy and the everlasting voice of nature order, he says, the word impossible has no place for a brave person.
That's a powerful thought to leave that section on. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's maybe circle back to what seemed like Carlyle's most fundamental philosophical points from the source, the bedrock ideas.
Yeah, he constantly brings us back to that core contrast, the eternal inner facts versus the transient outer appearances. The universe, he insists, is made by law. It's an all just and all beautiful, the sole reality.
But naming this ultimate reality, this primeval unspeakable, is hard, isn't it? He quotes Faust, who dare name him.
Right. He suggests many rituals, many dogmas are just namings, attempts to label something that perhaps should remain nameless. The source points towards contemplating this deepest truth, not in noisy debate or argument, but in silence.
Silence, where falsehoods have to cease.
Exactly. And that leads to that incredibly potent image he uses, Human life and all its noises, the factories, the politics, the arguments, all existing between two great silences.
The stars silent rest o'er us, and the graves under us silent. Wow, that puts things in perspective.
It does. It's a reminder of the vast, eternal, silent backdrop against which all our busy, often chaotic lives are lived out.
And even amid all the noise of modern business and cant, the source believes the presence of that primeval unspeakable, that deeper reality, still shines through.
Yes, and recognizing that presence, that underlying eternal reality, that is what truly constitutes wisdom for Carlyle.
And he hammers home his core belief. Knowledge of these eternal facts is absolutely necessary. Without it, the world just remains what he saw in the 1840s, a wretched flabule ludibrium.
A nightmare dream of quackery, suffering, insincerity. Something that feels impossible to truly fix from the surface level.
The sources leave us with a final, fundamental assertion that God is, essentially, that there's an ultimate reality and truth, and this will eventually be revealed.
And from recognizing that truth comes the understanding that false aristocracies are insupportable, that no aristocracies are impossible, that true aristocracies are at once indispensable and not easily attained. Finding true leadership, true worth is vital, but hard.
Wow. Okay. That was quite a journey through Thomas Carlyle's past and present, really guided by the sources you brought in.
It's dense stuff, but powerful. We've looked at his fierce critique of 19th century England's, well, Mammonism and idle dilettantism.
Yeah, and seeing his counterpoint in that functional, though definitely flawed world of a 12th century monastery, especially the leadership of Abbot Samson.
And we've dug into his really profound ideas about justice, truth, leadership based on genuine worth and wisdom, the absolute sacredness and necessity of work.
And that search for permanence and connection in a world that he saw as obsessed with the temporary and the superficial.
Thank you for bringing these, well, challenging and insightful sources to the deep dive today.
Absolutely. And as you, listening, reflect on all of this, as you go back to your own work, your own observations of the world today, maybe consider this powerful thought from the sources we've explored. Blessed is he who has found his work. Let him ask no other blessedness. What does that statement mean to you in your own life right now?